A winning future strategy could be costing you a lot of money in sports betting. Let me explain. That's what this video is going to be about. I'm going to break down some of the basic math behind futures and basically futures and portfolio allocation. Sports betting, it sounds boring, but it's more going to be about shitting on futures bettors who talk about having 50% ROIs, or like Vegas Dave having 500% ROIs. So there's a situation where even a Vegas Dave, you have Vegas Dave's future returns and you're just an absolute crusher week to week, you might not even bet futures. So that's what this is going to be about. It's just going to be the simple math about who futures betting is good for and who probably should be focusing on other things. And I think it does fit for some people, but it is not, in my opinion, a way to make a lot of money sports betting. And it's definitely not a way to be a professional or a serious semi-professional. Futures betting would probably be for the more recreational crowd, and I will get into that in a minute. But first, let's go over this sheet, which you will get for free. There is a link in the description that will send you over to my newsletter. If you sign up, give me your email. Once you sign up, you will get this sheet for free, and you could just unsubscribe right then and there. But at least I'll see the little thing tick up on my subscription, and I'll be happy for half a second. So let's get into this. What is the sheet? What are we working with? So for those of you who suffered in more of the financial services roles, this is kind of like a DCF setup. Basically, what this sheet is going to be doing is it's going to be comparing a strategy of betting some futures and only betting, the week-to-week bets. So what exactly does that mean? What are we trying to figure out? What we're trying to figure out is, are futures, even if you're a winning futures bettor, is being a winning futures bettor worth it? And what are the sensitivities to make it worth it or not worth it? What levers are we pulling? What is the crossover point when, either you're so good at futures or you're not good at, betting week to week or whatever? Where does it cross over and what factors influence that? And we'll pull all the levers. We're going to figure out all the scenarios. And by the end of this, you'll figure out if futures are worth pursuing for you, or if you're going to be better off taking that money and putting it into other sports betting markets. Okay. So what is this? We're going to go over the assumptions first, and then we'll go over the breakdown. But here's the basic inputs of this model. So in the general assumptions is going to be what I'm going to call like your weekly betting. So these are bets that settle in a day, 2 days, whatever it is. You're betting on, the Celtics to beat the Heat. You bet it the day of, you bet it the day before, whatever. It doesn't really matter. These are bets that settle within a week. These are your bread and butter. And these are the bets that, make up the majority of professional bettors' portfolio, and then bankroll churn per week. This is interesting. So why bankroll churn? This essentially means how quickly you can turn over your bankroll betting within a week. So if you have $1,000 bankroll and you bet 500 of it a week, that means you're churning through $500 worth of bets that week. Bonus reserve. I put this in here to make sure that if nothing else, futures bettors don't place all of their money on futures, not realizing that over the course of a year, especially at the beginning of seasons, when they might be betting right before the NFL starts, or they might be betting right before the NHL starts, at the beginning of seasons, there will be bonuses. At certain special events, there will be bonuses. These are going to be deposit bonuses. Sports books might open up. So at the bare minimum, futures bettors, always keep like $1,500, I would even say like $3,000 set aside no matter what, just for deposit bonuses. You will never get a better return on your futures, except for Vegas Dave, than somebody who is betting one deposit bonus, 100% match deposit bonus a year. So please, all futures bettors, don't unload the full bankroll into futures. Have a bonus fund. Okay, so I created the bonus reserve because I'm trying to show that your whole bankroll isn't actually usable for futures. There's only a portion of it, and that portion is the amount that's above that bonus reserve. Here in C7, we have bankroll. So what was bankroll? That's obvious. This is how much money is it obvious? Like, I had a whole like replenishable versus finite bankroll conversation last episode. There will be some tie-ins from last episode, so check that one out with Dr. Raz. You'll see some concepts come up that are similar. But anyway, bankroll 2000, and these are all things you can change. So these are all levers that you can pull, and I'll start pulling them a little bit later. I don't want to spoil the end. I'm sure people are guessing, you've said mean things about futures bettors before. So this is probably going to show that futures bettors are stupid. Yeah, partially. But like, I've kind of, after building this, come to believe that there's a very specific use case for futures bettors. There's actually two very specific use cases where futures betting is the perfect thing for them to be doing. And I will get to that after we go through the model. So these are our general bets. The bankroll, the bonus, reserve, these are, in general assumptions. But basically this top section of assumptions is things that relate to your day-to-day, your weekly betting. Now down here we have our futures assumptions, and these are pretty important. It's a different game. And it's a different game because of this number. Average time to settle in weeks. Why is that? The problem with futures, and we all kind of inherently know this, is that when you bet futures, you're basically loaning the sportsbook that money. You're giving them, however much money. It won't settle for however long because it's a futures. Futures imply that the bet settles sometime in the next 1+ weeks. It's not always true. You could bet like British Open futures on Monday and the bet would sell on Sunday. And it's like NBA Finals futures when it's actually in the finals. But like basically what futures are like you're making a bet on a team to win the Stanley Cup at the beginning or middle of the hockey season, and there's a significant period of time that's between when you make the bet and when the bet settles, and that settlement time is a huge factor in whether the futures bet is worth betting or not. But you probably can guess which way that this number should move for the futures bet to be better. Why don't you think about that? Write your answer down, hold it in your head, and then if you're wrong, just pretend that you picked the other thing and then feel good about yourself. Easy game. Futures ROI. This is your ROI of your futures bets. So futures people have high ROIs, and it checks out. Like yes, Vegas Dave or whatever, these people are lying, but there's people who have decent futures ROIs, and the people who have, bet futures should have higher ROIs than the people who bet week to week for many reasons. One, it's not a traded market really, so there's no price discovery going on. Two, the lines could just be like stale in futures markets. Like let's say Pat Mahomes gets hurt, Bovada doesn't move the Chiefs or like someone else to win the AFCs, future odds or something. Like there's so many interrelated things that can affect futures that they're not really updating for because they don't trade that, and the volume's pretty low. There's going to be spots mid-season where something might not be taken into account in a futures market quickly enough, where it could be taken into account in the game market or the total market pretty instantaneously. So you're trading against a really soft market when you bet futures, and it should be higher ROI, like no doubt. So the ROIs I'm going to give to our futures friends are going to be very generous, 30, 40, maybe 50%, and could be doable. I don't know. And then bankroll available for futures. This is just going to be a discrepancy between bankroll and bonus reserve. Again, futures bettors, if you're going to bet futures, have a bonus reserve. Say it 1,000 times. Don't bet your bonus reserve on the Eagles to win the NFC. Fly Eagles fly. Percent of futures bankroll bet. So this is just how much we're actually going to bet on the given future. Now let's go over what the model actually does. So what the model does is you can change any of the numbers in the gray boxes. So for example, let's just say we change this to 30, right? Or 30. So what it's going to do, it's going to build two scenarios. The scenarios kind of build like this, where it's calculating expected value. So this isn't the same as running a simulation, and it's going to be like anything. it's going to be worse than a simulation. But what it's doing is it's just calculating this on an expected value basis. The other thing I want to say about bankroll churn and why that we're betting a percent of our bankroll a week instead of an absolute amount, because let me put it like this. You have a $1,000 bankroll, right? You can bet $500 a week. That's great. You have a $750, so there's still $500 you can't bet, right? $500 bankroll or $1,000 bankroll, you bet 500. Let's say you have a $750 bankroll. Shouldn't you still just be able to bet 500 because it's a threshold? In practicality, no. It's important to look at what you can bet as a percentage of your total bankroll allocated across sports books. Is that frequently you will be in situations where anybody who bets understands this just through practice, which is you're never going to get to bet as much as you want to bet, and oftentimes you will have money at the sports book that you don't have the bets at, and the sports book that has all the bets you want, you have your smallest bankroll position. The reality of it is you get to bet a percent of your bankroll that's dispersed through sports books when you're betting on a weekly basis, because moving money is not instantaneous, and therefore you are never able to just bet optimally what you want to bet or get the perfect allocation. So in practice, you're always going to be getting a percent of your bankroll bet, and it's not a threshold. So that's why having more money in your weekly bankroll will allow you to bet more, than if you have, if you're taking money out to bet futures, you are in actuality, in practice, decreasing the amount you can bet week to week. Even if you're not betting your full bankroll, it doesn't really matter, because you need to have that money allocated as best you can to adequately capture volume, which as we know, we cannot withdraw quickly from sports books. You can deposit quick, but you can't withdraw quick. So that money is often not going to be there when you need it. So having extra dollars allocated to books creates more volume for you. Okay, so now I've made that stipulation clear, because it might not make sense why why when you have futures bets on, you're actually betting a smaller amount each week, because you're thinking, I'm only betting 50% of my bankroll a week. I have I have 500 on futures, so it doesn't even matter because I'm only betting 1,000 a week. So that's why that mechanic is different in here, because I'm trying to have this represent reality but also be simple. So it's calculating EV in a way that I feel is pretty realistic. We're not using a sim. I don't think it's worth it to build a sim. I think these concepts are pretty self-explanatory, and they will hopefully become clear to you soon. What this is doing is essentially it's taking two scenarios. As you can see, scenario one is no futures. This is just, a standard bettor who's betting, his weekly stuff, his or her weekly stuff, NBA games, NHL games, whatever it is, player props, all this stuff. Scenario two is we throw in the futures. So if you look at scenario one's all in this box. So scenario one's describing a bettor right now who has a 2% ROI, who bets 50% of their bankroll a week, has a $2,000 bankroll, and bonus reserve doesn't matter for a weekly bettor, because the bonus, their bankroll is going to reallocate itself in a day, and they'll be able to capture almost every bonus. So bankroll reserve doesn't matter for this. It's going to determine the future bankroll. So this bettor, for example, starts week one with $2,000 bankroll, so it's equals C7, and then they're gonna grow at their average ROI times bankroll churn. So you think about it, basically what's happening is they bet 50% of their bankroll, which is $1,000, and they make a 2% ROI. Pretty simple. 2% of 1,000 is 20, and then they end with $2,020. Again, all EV. I know it doesn't always work out like this. And then 2020 becomes their new bonus, their new starting bankroll, and it kind of scales for there. So you see it's like 2020, 21. You can kind of see like, okay, making a little bit more, whatever. So pretty simple scenario for a general normal, or whatever you want to call it, better. Now, scenario 2, we mix in a futures bet. Now, our normal, you'll see the bottom part functions exactly like scenario 1. You have your starting bankroll, your growth, your ending bankroll, right? What the futures scenario does is it takes your futures bet, and it just assumes you bet it all. First week, bet it all. And then it calculates, or it will create the table basically, and it'll say, okay, 30 weeks till it settles. So you're like, okay, what's going to happen is the growth is going to be 0.000000000, and then bam, 30% return on week 30 when the future settles. So it keeps your bankroll is the same. So you have your 500. Doesn't technically take it out of the bankroll. That $500 is a ticket that you own. So we keep it in the bankroll, and you can see the balance, and the balance kind of starts to lag behind its counterpart in the traditional betting method, because that bettor has more money that they're betting each week. That's returning more money. Like you can see, for example, $24 of growth here compared to $18 of growth here. So each week the non-futures player is kind of putting a little extra in the pot. And then on the 30th week, boom, the futures bettor makes a big comeback. So that's the mechanics. And what it does is it essentially, we figure out this number for both. So and this number changes. So whatever week you punch in, it will update for that. So it's like you change to week 10, it will know that you're cutting both off at week 10 and comparing them. So up in the results tab, what you have is bankroll no futures. This is at week 30, so you can see that is correct. Ooh. So perfect. So what it does is basically it will tell us when we put these parameters in at the end what your bankroll is if you do bet futures and if you don't bet futures. So it's really helpful information, and ultimately you just kind of need to move stuff around and watch this, but it's good to know how the mechanics of the model work, because it's not perfect and there are some oversights. This is the important part where we learn something, where we're going to change some things around. Now, I said there's 4 important things, or maybe I didn't, but there's 4 important things that determine if we should be betting futures or not. The first is your ROI when you're not betting, your non-futures ROI. So it's hard to win sports betting, and it's harder to win at sports betting that is not futures. So it's not a given that this is even positive. And if it is positive, are you getting it through really bad account health strategies that, you're going to run out of accounts quickly and not be able to bet for 30 weeks? Because the hidden assumption here is that you're going to have a 2% ROI for 30 weeks. Well, let's say that you get on OddsJam and you burn all your rec book accounts in 2 weeks and you give up. Probably should have bet futures, because you weren't going to be able to bet for 30 weeks. So sustaining a 2% ROI for 30 weeks is not trivial, right? It either requires some skill in getting accounts, it could be in everything, getting accounts, some origination, or like a little more nuance, like top-down betting or whatever, finding an occasional SGP error, whatever it is, tailing, finding somebody who actually wins the tail, whatever it is. I don't want to make it seem like that's trivial, right? And that's the first thing that does matter. So like, what if you did this and you lose? That means that if you have negative ROI, your bankroll will end up at, you'll lose basically $280. And if you bet the futures, you're crushing it. You're making $220 more than you would have, because you're a losing bettor without futures. So the very first person that betting futures is good for is the person who loses betting in non-futures markets. Should be obvious, but we gotta say it, right? Now, but let's see what happens on the flip side, right? Let's say that you are a true G. You're just out there, you're a sick originator, you're posting at Twitter about how steam chasers are mid-curve, you're trolling people, which is the sign of a really good originator, and you actually have a 5% ROI that you're definitely going to sustain over 30 weeks because you make good meme posts. So we change this to 5%. Whoa. Not good. Not good. You're sacrificing a lot of opportunity costs when you start to get into the higher levels of weekly ROI. Very simple. The higher your ROI on non-futures, the less inclined you should be to bet on futures. Next thing is bankroll churn. This is how much you're actually getting down a week, right? So 50%, betting 50% of your bankroll a week is no small task, especially if you have a bigger bankroll. So let's see what happens if you are this crusher, but you only find a few bets a week. But you don't want to bet other bets because you don't want to be called a steam chaser. So you have to only bet the 5 bets that you can bet into the closing line of Pinnacle so that people think you're cool. So your volume's not very good. So let's say it goes down to you can only churn 10% betting like that. Oh, futures makes a comeback. All of a sudden futures isn't looking very bad. It's because you're not getting a lot of volume. So the equation for making money in sports betting is volume times ROI, basically. There's risk adjusted return, we could talk about too, of course. But basically it's just like how good are you at betting times how much you bet. Actually, I wouldn't even say how good are you at betting, because being able to find something that you can bet a lot is part of being good at betting. It's like your ROI times how much you can bet it, right? If you have a good ROI, you can't bet it that much. I mean, you're not that good at betting. And that's what this is showing. So if you have a high ROI, but you can't churn it, you can't bet it a lot, then maybe you should take a look at some futures on the side because you really actually don't have much opportunity cost you're sacrificing with not being able to bet that much. Let's do a little reset here. Let's go back to our 50% churn. And now let's tweak out some of the futures. Let's tweak some of the futures numbers, and then we can kind of see what is driving the returns on the futures level. So futures is interesting because of the time to settle. And I think this is the most interesting thing to analyze, is how much does time to settle affect whether you should be placing a futures or not, or a future bet or not. So 30, there's a tab here. I just was curious, so I went through some of the league season lengths, and you have regular season, you have regular season plus playoffs kind of listed out here. I felt like 30 was a number that kind of represented this all pretty well. Usually futures, you have futures that are like how many wins over the course of the regular season. I think that's like a popular one in a lot of sports. And then you have like the Stanley Cup, World Series, winning the American League, like whatever it is. Those futures, those tend to take longer to settle because they involve the playoffs. So I just went with about 30, but we can tweak this around and figure it out. And there's a case to be made for the NFL to be not that bad of a futures market. So let's figure out why. So we have our solid high volume bettor on the top. He's doing 2% ROI, churning 50% of his bankroll a week, and he sees, okay, we got a 30% ROI futures opportunity, but it's like so-and-so to win the American League in baseball. What was baseball? Okay, yeah, that's about right. At the start of the season, for whatever reason, this person's been told this is a 30% ROI bet. Okay, well, what does that mean? What do we do? Should we make it? A 30% ROI bet? You got to make it, right? It's 30%. You can't make that anywhere else. Wrong. You can. It just takes a while. We got to talk about effort to return. It is lower on futures, so that is nice. But stay with me here. Average time to sell is 30. He's like, plugs into the calculator. Actually, I shouldn't be betting it. It's not a good I have too much of a good thing going on my weekly betting to be allocating money to a 30% futures. And they're like, okay. But now it's like halfway through the season, same person comes back to our bettor, our friend is like, same situation, 30% ROI, and it's on so-and-so to win the American League. Same things come up. I promise it's a 30% ROI, and for all intents and purposes, we just believe this person. But the season's cut in half. Now we're betting halfway through the season. How does this change what we think about futures, or what we think about taking this bet? And what it changes is the entire calculus of if this is a good bet or not. The whole thing is driven by how long these bets take to settle. A bet that is not worth it at the beginning of the season might be worth it in the middle of the season. Look, I'm not a futures bettor, but it seems to me that in the middle of the season, there could be some good intel that the books won't react quickly to, and all of a sudden it could become a high ROI bet, and the time to settle is shorter. So those start to become better. Now let's say you're betting in the futures in the playoffs. So let's say you're like, oh, okay, the playoffs start. What playoffs do we care about here? All right, let's do the baseball playoffs. So we got 4.5 weeks. Let's call it 5. So get it a little closer. So now we're like, hey, we want to make a futures bet at the beginning of the playoffs. Now, are these good bets? Like, it seems unlikely that you'll ROI a huge amount once the playoffs start, just because you have a ton of data and not much is unknown at that point. And everybody seems to be paying more attention, but maybe there's some news-based thing that comes up, very well could be, and you find a spot. I mean, even if you're, our Twitter god tier troll originator and you're 5%ing, that's still a bet to make. Even if you're 10%ing, you're still making that bet. Think about that. If you're churning 50% of your bankroll at 10% ROI, taking futures in the playoffs is, if they're 30% edge, or 30% ROI, which again is not easy or likely, but there might be one or two, it's a lot better. I've always been more interested if I hear somebody who I think is sharp, has like a lean on, to win the NBA championship or to win the Stanley Cup, and we're in the playoffs, we're middle of the playoffs, whatever it is, I start to pay attention a lot more, because these bets are actually really good because their time frame is really short. If you're ROIing close to what a good futures bettor is ROIing, then they're like slam dunks, and there's almost nobody who's so good at their week-to-week betting that they're not worth it. So once you are towards the end of the season and you're looking for future spots then, or somebody who's a good bettor and kind of tosses you a play or two, then I'm much more inclined to be taking these. The last thing I wanted to talk about is kind of the profiles. And you have your ROI, you have your futures ROI, which it's kind of boring. It's like, whatever. We change your ROI, like obviously that changes whether you should be betting futures or, weekly, whatever. Like, we've already kind of gone over the ROI with the week-to-week betting, but what I did want to touch on last thing was kind of the profile of who I think should be betting futures. And this is in, all on, being earnest and whatnot. It's very good. It's a good starting place for a lot of people, because it's hard to ROI 2% over 30 weeks. Like, people don't just do that. You're not going to do that even just like signing up for OddsJam. You won't, or you won't churn once you have all your accounts, limited or whatnot. So it's not trivial to do that. And futures is a great way to get a lot of bang for your buck if you actually want to do this and make money, or at least not lose money, or make like, you think it's interesting to make positive EV bets, but you also like watching the sports unfold and kind of rooting for it. Futures are great. So for like high skill recreational bettors who are like right around break even, or people who are kind of just starting to get into plus EV betting and making a little bit, or maybe not making enough in their week-to-week betting, futures are a great way to play a soft market that gives you a lot of sweat value, right? The second person that futures are good for is people who don't have a lot of time but are sharp and want to stay kind of plugged in. So time greatly impacts this churn number, right? It also, honestly, it impacts your ROI, because you have to spend time to, stay sharp, right? So, but time plays a huge factor in churn. And if you're somebody who has a couple hours a week, there's really no way that you're gonna be churning if you're using like a reasonable staking strategy, like more than 10% of your bankroll. And even if you're really good and picking some good spots at like 4%, it's still gonna be a situation where the futures are gonna make sense, right? It's a good opportunity to spend a couple hours and attack a market. I think they can be probably beat with a couple hours of work a week. You're not churning anyway, so you might be able to bet almost as many futures bets as you bet just straights. If you're just like taking a couple hours a week and betting futures, you know, how many more straights would you bet? Or I call them straights. How many more just like whatever week, you know, bets that settle within a day or two? You might not even bet that much more. So the reason that the discrepancy comes because there's only so many futures that you can bet. So you might spend an hour or two a week if you're betting both, you know, your weekly bets and your futures, betting futures, and then you spend, if you're a high volume bettor, professional, semi-professional, you know, 20, 30 hours of the week on your, you know, weekly bets, stuff that settles quickly. Well, if you only have the 1 or 2 hours, don't worry about that stuff. Like, then you can use that to bet, to maximally allocate your time to futures, finding good futures. And then the rest of the week, like, go about your life and, you know, don't gamble. I don't know what that's like, but like go about your life and have it be a positive experience for you where you're spending a little bit of time doing something fun. You know, you could be learning some computer science or math skills on the way. There's a lot of good synergies there. So for people who don't have a lot of time but are sharp bettors, I would really recommend, instead of like popping on the screen and trying to steam chase for like an hour or two a week, I would actually highly recommend getting involved in futures. So that's the gist of it. I hope that this format was somewhat engaging. Like, I think that I visualize stuff better when it's laid out in Excel or, you know, in a model. You know, I think it's fun to play the inputs and see kind of what happens. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. Please sign up for my newsletter. I'm gonna get back to writing that. I really enjoy writing more long form stuff, and it's gonna be for, you know, more serious sports bettors. Could be a little dry. I'm gonna try and get better at writing, make it both fun and educational, but the main thing is you sign up. I will send you the sheet. You can immediately unsubscribe, but please don't. It'll hurt my feelings. Yeah, play around with this. See, you know, when a situation comes up to bet a future, just kind of throw a couple of assumptions in here, see what it spits out, and soon you'll kind of get the gist of like when it's worth it and when it's not. And this is something that we should be focusing more on as bettors, which I would call like portfolio allocation. It's not all about building a good model. There's a lot of stuff that provides value outside of that, and this is one of them. Thinking about risk-adjusted return, portfolio allocation, you know, opportunity costs, all of this stuff has real impacts on your dollars earned, and really shouldn't be looked over. So thanks for watching. Appreciate everybody who has kind of come along for this ride and said super nice things. I got a lot of nice things in the Discord. It just really makes me happy and makes this all worthwhile, that people are learning and making some money. So appreciate everybody who's been watching, and, you know, only up from here. I'll see you all in the next episode.